The line at Brood Awakening, a bustling Chicago coffee shop, was a microcosm of the city's morning rush. Suits, briefcases, and impatient glances at smartwatches. Aisha Thompson stood at the counter, her fingers brushing the worn silver locket around her neck, a gift from her mother inscribed with "Dream Big." At 38, she was no stranger to pressure, but the cashier's words hit like a slap. "Ma'am, your card's declined. Again." The machine's beep echoed like a judgment in the crowded room. Aisha's jaw tightened, her dark eyes narrowing as she reached for another card, knowing it wouldn't work either. The corporate account from Apex Innovations had been cut off months ago, a final jab from a company that had already taken so much. Behind her, a voice cut through the hum of espresso machines and murmured orders. "Hey, don't worry about it. Put her coffee on my tab." The tone was smooth, patronizing, dripping with the kind of charity that felt more like control. Aisha turned, her breath catching as she locked eyes with Richard Hensley, CEO of Apex Innovations. His tailored gray suit screamed money, his silver hair perfectly combed, and his smile, God, that smile, carried the smugness of a man who thought he was saving her. He didn't recognize her, not the woman he'd fired a year ago, the one whose ideas he'd stolen to line his pockets. To him, she was just another stranger in need of his $6 generosity. Aisha's fingers tightened around the locket, the metal warm against her skin. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "You're never less than anyone, Aisha, not ever." She forced a polite nod, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. "Thank you," she said, soft but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. Richard waved it off, already tapping his Apple Watch to the reader. The machine chirped its approval, and he sauntered toward the executive tables in the corner, not sparing her another glance. To him, it was a fleeting act of kindness, a story to tell over steak dinners about how he'd helped a struggling black woman in a coffee shop. But Aisha wasn't struggling, not anymore. As she took her latte, the weight of a USB drive in her purse felt heavier than the drink in her hand. It held secrets, emails, recordings, proof of Richard's lies that would unravel his empire. For a year, she'd been building something he couldn't imagine. Nova Ventures, a tech startup poised to outshine Apex. She glanced at the locket, her mother's words fueling her resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving that talent like hers, born in a South Side apartment, honed through MIT scholarships, and dismissed by men like Richard, could rewrite the rules. As she walked toward the exit, the morning sun glinted off Chicago's skyline, a city of steel and ambition. Richard sat at his table, scrolling his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing. Aisha paused at the door, her reflection in the glass showing a woman who turned humiliation into power. That $6 coffee would cost him everything. She stepped into the street, her heels clicking with purpose, knowing that by tomorrow, Richard Hensley would learn what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. Aisha Thompson stepped out of Brood Awakening into the crisp Chicago morning, the taste of her latte soured by Richard Hensley's smug charity. Her fingers grazed the locket around her neck, its inscription, "Dream Big," a quiet reminder of her mother's voice, urging her forward from a childhood in a cramped South Side apartment. The city buzzed around her, honking cabs, the clatter of the L train overhead, and the pulse of ambition that made Chicago a battleground for dreamers like her. At 38, Aisha had fought her way from public school scholarships to MIT, then to the top ranks of Apex Innovations, a tech giant that promised to reshape the world with artificial intelligence. But Apex, under Richard Hensley's iron grip, had shown her that talent alone wasn't enough, not when prejudice wore a suit and called itself leadership. She crossed Michigan Avenue, the magnificent mile gleaming with glass towers and designer storefronts. Apex's headquarters loomed in the distance, a sleek monolith of steel and hubris. A year ago, Aisha had been its director of innovation, crafting algorithms that powered self-driving car systems and secured billion-dollar contracts. Her work had put Apex on the map, earning praise in TechCrunch and whispers of IPOs. But Richard, with his Ivy League pedigree and old money arrogance, never saw her as an equal. To him, she was an outlier, a black woman from the South Side who didn't belong in his boardroom. His colleagues, a parade of pale faces in identical suits, nodded along, dismissing her ideas with polite smiles and coded phrases like, "not our brand of leadership." Aisha's phone buzzed as she passed a street vendor selling hot dogs, the scent mingling with the city's grit. A text from her younger sister, Maya, lit up the screen. "You okay? Saw your post about starting over. Mom would be proud." Aisha smiled, her heart softening. Maya, a nurse working double shifts at Northwestern Memorial, was her anchor, the one who'd sat with her through late-night study sessions and celebrated her MIT acceptance with homemade jerk chicken. Their mother, a single parent who'd cleaned offices downtown to keep them fed, had passed 5 years ago, but her locket and her words lived on in Aisha. That strength had carried her through Apex's betrayal, and it fueled her now. She slipped into a co-working space in the Loop, a hive of startups and freelancers. Her desk, tucked in a corner, was cluttered with post-it notes and a worn photo of her and Maya at their mother's 50th birthday, laughing over a lopsided cake. Aisha opened her laptop, the screen glowing with the logo of Nova Ventures, the tech startup she'd built in secret over the past year. It wasn't just a company, it was a rebellion. 12 former Apex employees, all discarded for being too different, had joined her. There was Kevin Nguyen, a brilliant coder fired for pitching ideas too foreign for Richard's taste, and Sarah Kim, Aisha's college friend and Apex's executive assistant, who fed her intel from the inside. Together, they were building an AI platform to rival Apex's, one that prioritized ethics over ego. Aisha's fingers hovered over the USB drive in her purse, loaded with damning evidence. Emails where Richard mocked her as too self-assured for her background, contracts he'd fudged to win government bids, and proof he'd stolen her algorithm. She leaned back, the city's hum fading, as she pictured Richard's face in that coffee shop, clueless about the storm she was brewing. Nova Ventures wasn't just her comeback, it was a reckoning. For her mother, for Maya, for every kid from the South Side who'd been told their dreams were too big. Aisha closed her laptop, her resolve hardening. Richard Hensley had mistaken her silence for surrender, but he was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. Aisha Thompson's heels clicked against the polished floor of her co-working space as she tucked the USB drive back into her purse, its weight a reminder of the fight ahead. The memory of Richard Hensley's smug smile in the coffee shop lingered like a bad aftertaste, but it was nothing compared to the sting of what he'd done a year ago. Chicago's skyline glittered through the window, a city that had raised her to be resilient, but even the South Side's grit hadn't prepared her for the betrayal that had shattered her career. She opened her laptop again, pulling up a file labeled Apex Presentation, June 2024, the ghost of a moment that still burned in her chest. 12 months earlier, Aisha had walked into Apex Innovation's boardroom, her heart pounding with the kind of nervous pride that came from knowing she'd cracked the impossible. She'd spent months developing an AI algorithm that could optimize self-driving car systems, cutting costs by 30% and securing a $2 billion government contract. It was her masterpiece, born from sleepless nights and a belief that her work could change the world. She'd stood before Richard Hensley and his board, 6 white men in suits that cost more than her mother's old Hyundai, her slides projected on a massive screen. "Gentlemen," she'd said, her voice steady, "this algorithm will not only save Apex from its current losses, but position us as the leader in autonomous tech for the next decade." The room had been silent, but not the good kind. Richard, leaning back in his leather chair, twirled a Mont Blanc pen, his lips curling into a patronizing smirk. "Ambitious, Aisha," he'd said, not even glancing at her slides. "But let's be realistic. This feels a bit out of our scope." The others nodded, their eyes avoiding hers. She'd pushed through, presenting data, projections, and case studies for 2 hours, her voice unwavering despite the growing chill in the room. When she finished, the applause was tepid, and Richard's "we'll take it under advisement" felt like a door slamming shut. 3 weeks later, Apex announced a revolutionary AI initiative. Her algorithm, word for word, presented by Richard at a glitzy press conference. Aisha watched the live stream from her apartment, her stomach churning, as he took credit for every line of code, every sleepless night she'd poured into it. The company's stock soared, and Richard pocketed a $5 million bonus. Aisha got a call from HR the next day. "We're restructuring. Your role is no longer needed." No explanation, no severance, just a security guard waiting to escort her out, her colleagues watching in stunned silence as she packed her desk. The humiliation was public, deliberate, a message that she didn't belong. Aisha closed the file on her laptop, her fingers trembling. The locket around her neck felt heavier, her mother's words, "dream big," clashing with the memory of that day. She'd grown up hearing stories of her mother scrubbing floors downtown, smiling through exhaustion to give her daughters a shot at something better. Aisha had believed Apex was that shot, a place where her MIT degree and Southside hustle could prove the naysayers wrong. But Richard had seen her not as a leader, but as a threat, a black woman who dared to outshine him. She leaned back, the co-working space's hum fading, as she pictured her sister Maya's text from earlier. Mom would be proud. Maya was right. Aisha wasn't done fighting. That algorithm was hers, and so was the future. Richard had stolen her work, but he wouldn't steal her legacy. She opened a new email, typing a single line to her team at Nova Ventures. "It's time to take back what's ours." Aisha Thompson closed the email to her Nova Ventures team, her single line, "It's time to take back what's ours," still glowing on the screen. The co-working space in Chicago's Loop buzzed around her, but her focus was razor-sharp, fueled by the sting of Richard Hensley's betrayal a year ago. The memory of being escorted out of Apex Innovations, her algorithm stolen and her career tarnished, wasn't just a wound, it was rocket fuel. She reached for the USB drive in her purse, its contents a ticking bomb, proof of Richard's lies, his prejudice, and his fraud. But she needed more than evidence. She needed a team, and she wasn't alone. Aisha's phone vibrated, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Kevin Yang, a former Apex coder and her first recruit for Nova Ventures. "Meet at 6 p.m. I've got something big." Kevin, a first-generation Vietnamese American, had been fired from Apex for pitching overly exotic ideas, a code for his refusal to dim his brilliance to fit Richard's narrow vision. Aisha smiled, nubbed response, smiled, picturing his wiry frame and sharp eyes. Kevin had been waiting for this moment as much as she had. That evening, in a dimly lit diner on Wabash Avenue, Aisha slid into a booth across from Kevin and 11 other former Apex employees, men and women of color, queer coders, single parents, all discarded by Richard for not fitting his traditional mold. The group was a patchwork of Chicago's diversity, united by talent and resentment. Kevin pushed a laptop across the table, his voice low. "I hacked into Apex's old server backups before I left. Look at this." The screen lit up with emails, Richard's words, cold and damning. One read, "Aisha's too self-assured for her background. We need someone who fits our image." Another outlined a scheme to inflate Apex's diversity numbers for a $2 billion government contract using fake employee profiles.
Aisha's blood ran cold, but her face stayed steady. The locket around her neck felt warm, her mother's words, "Dream big," echoing in her mind. She thought of Maya working late shifts at the hospital and their mother's pride in her daughter's fight for a better life. This wasn't just her battle, it was theirs. "He faked the numbers?" she asked, her voice calm but deadly. Kevin nodded. "And he's doing it again for their international expansion, but it's falling apart. They've lost 3 major clients this quarter." The table erupted in murmurs. Maria Lopez, a data analyst fired for questioning Apex's pay gaps, leaned forward. "He's desperate. I heard he's pitching at the Global Tech Summit next month." Aisha's eyes lit up. The summit was a stage for industry giants, packed with investors and media. It was the perfect place to strike. She turned to Sarah Kim, Richard's executive assistant and her college friend, who'd been feeding her intel for months. Sarah, sipping a milkshake, grinned. "Already on it. He thinks Nova Ventures is just a promising startup. He's clueless." Aisha leaned back, the diner's neon glow reflecting in her eyes. Richard's empire was crumbling, but he didn't know it yet. His emails, his fraud, his arrogance, they were all on that USB drive. But Aisha wanted more than exposure. Nova Ventures was building an AI platform that didn't just compete with Apex, it redefined the game, prioritizing transparency and fairness. She looked around at the table, seeing the faces of people who'd been underestimated like her. "We're not just taking him down," she said, her voice low and fierce. "We're building something better, something that lasts." The group nodded, their shared purpose electric. As she left the diner, the Chicago wind biting her skin, Aisha felt her mother's locket against her chest. Richard had stolen her work, but he couldn't steal her future. The summit was coming, and she was ready.
Aisha Thompson stepped out of the Wabash Avenue diner into the Chicago night, the city's neon lights flickering like a promise. The weight of her team's resolve and the USB drive in her purse pressed against her as she walked, the wind carrying the faint hum of jazz from a nearby club. The meeting with her Nova Ventures crew had lit a fire in her, but it wasn't just about exposing Richard Hensley's lies at the Global Tech Summit. She wanted more than revenge. She wanted to build something that would outlast Apex Innovations, something that would honor her mother's mantra, "Dream big," and prove that talent like hers, forged in the South Side struggle, could change the world. Back at her apartment, Aisha sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop casting shadows on the walls. A framed photo of her and her sister Maya at their mother's last birthday party sat nearby, their smiles frozen in a moment of joy over a lopsided cake. Maya's text from earlier that day blinked on her phone. "You're doing this for all of us, sis." Aisha's throat tightened. Their mother had worked nights cleaning offices to put food on the table, always telling her daughters that education and grit could break any barrier. Aisha had believed it until Richard's betrayal showed her that some barriers were built on prejudice. Now, Nova Ventures was her chance to tear them down. She opened a file labeled Nova AI Platform, her team's answer to Apex's flawed systems. Unlike Richard's profit-driven tech, Nova's platform prioritized ethical AI, transparent algorithms that didn't discriminate, designed to serve communities often ignored by corporate giants. In 6 months, they'd built a prototype that outpaced Apex's tech, and early demos had caught the eye of major clients. But Aisha knew exposure alone wouldn't be enough. To bury Richard, Nova had to become indispensable. She typed a message to her team. "We're not just taking Apex's clients, we're taking their future. Summit prep starts tomorrow." The next morning, Aisha met her team at their rented office in River North, a scrappy space filled with mismatched chairs and whiteboards scrawled with code. Kevin Nguyen, his laptop open, was already mapping out their summit strategy. "Richard's pitching Apex's international expansion," he said, pointing to a leaked memo from Sarah Kim. "He's banking on new markets to save his numbers, but he's bleeding clients." Maria Lopez, the data analyst, chimed in. "We've already signed 2 of his, $20 million in contracts. They love our transparency."
Aisha nodded, her mind racing. The Global Tech Summit, attended by industry titans and streamed live to millions, was their stage. But they needed to do more than expose Richard's fraud. They needed to steal his spotlight. Sarah Kim, sipping coffee from a thermos, leaned forward. "I got us a slot as a partner presenter, but there's a catch. Richard's team is sniffing around. They suspect a leak." Aisha's heart skipped. Sarah, her college friend who'd stuck by her through Apex's chaos, was risking everything as their insider. "We'll protect you," Aisha said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about us. It's about every kid who's told they don't belong." The room went quiet, the weight of their shared mission settling in. Aisha thought of her mother, who'd once stood in a Chicago church, singing hymns with neighbors who'd become family. That sense of community drove her now. Nova Ventures wasn't just a company, it was a movement. As the team dove into summit prep, Aisha clutched her locket, her mother's words steadying her. Richard thought he'd broken her, but he'd only built her resolve. The summit was a month away, and Aisha was ready to turn his empire to ash.
The Chicago skyline sparkled beyond the River North office's windows, but Aisha Thompson's focus was locked on the whiteboard, where Kevin Nguyen scrawled the final details of their Global Tech Summit plan. The air buzzed with urgency. Laptops hummed, coffee cups piled up, and her Nova Ventures team moved like a well-oiled machine. A month had passed since their diner meeting, and the summit, a glittering showcase of tech giants, was days away. Aisha's locket rested against her chest, her mother's words, "Dream big," a quiet pulse beneath her racing thoughts. Richard Hensley thought he'd crushed her, but he was about to face a reckoning on the world stage. Aisha stood, addressing the team. "This isn't just about exposing Richard, it's about showing what we can do." She clicked open a demo of Nova's AI platform, its sleek interface projecting onto the wall. Unlike Apex's clunky, profit-driven systems, Nova's tech promised transparency, algorithms that didn't profile or exclude, built for communities like the South Side she'd grown up in. Maria Lopez, the data analyst, grinned. "We've locked in another client, 15 million. They're jumping ship from Apex." The team cheered, but Aisha's eyes flicked to Sarah Kim, who sat quieter than usual, her thermos untouched. "You okay?" Aisha asked, sensing trouble. Sarah hesitated, then leaned in. "Richard's team is digging. They found an email trail. Nothing solid, but they're watching me." Aisha's stomach tightened. Sarah, her college friend who'd slug her Apex's secrets, was their linchpin. If Richard suspected a leak, their plan could unravel. "We'll cover you," Aisha said, her voice steady despite the stakes. "Your family." Sarah nodded, but her eyes betrayed worry. "I thought of her sister Maya, who'd once patched up a neighbor kid's knee in their mother's kitchen, the whole block crowding in like kin." That South Side spirit of protecting your own drove her now. She wouldn't let Sarah fall. Kevin interrupted, holding up his laptop. "This is our ammo." The screen showed files from Apex's old servers, emails where Richard mocked diversity hires, fake diversity reports for government contracts, and a memo admitting he'd stolen Aisha's algorithm. The team had spent weeks crafting a summit presentation to showcase Nova's platform while slipping in these truths, subtle but devastating. Aisha's plan was bold: infiltrate Richard's keynote as a partner presenter, then turn his stage into her battlefield. But Sarah's warning gnawed at her. They needed a backup. "Kevin," Aisha said, "can you encrypt our files and set up a live stream? If Richard tries to shut us down, we go public, real time." Kevin's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Done. I've got a contact at TechCrunch ready to amplify it." Maria chimed in, "And I've got data showing Apex's client losses, 30 million this quarter. We hit them, they're done." The room crackled with purpose, but Aisha's mind drifted to a memory. Her mother at a Southside church picnic, laughing with neighbors over ribs and cornbread, everyone pitching in to make it work. That was her team now, a community of outcasts building something unstoppable.
She clutched her locket, her mother's strength steadying her. "We're not just taking down Apex," she said, her voice low and fierce. "We're showing the world what happens when you bet on the wrong people." As the team finalized their slides, Aisha's phone buzzed, a text from Maya. "You got this, sis. Make Mom proud." She smiled, the warmth cutting through the tension. The summit was their shot, but Richard's suspicion about Sarah was a ticking clock. Aisha glanced at the Chicago skyline, its towers gleaming like a challenge. Richard had built his empire on lies, but she'd built hers on truth. In 3 days, she'd walk onto his stage and rewrite.
The grand ballroom of Chicago's McCormick Place buzzed with the energy of the Global Tech Summit, its chandeliers casting a glow over a sea of suits and screens. Aisha Thompson stood backstage, her heart pounding as she adjusted the mic clipped to her blazer. The locket around her neck, her mother's "Dream Big" inscribed inside, felt like an anchor against the storm of nerves. On the stage, Richard Hensley was mid-keynote, his voice booming about Apex Innovations' bold new era of international expansion. The crowd of investors, tech moguls, and live stream viewers hung on his every word, oblivious to the truth Aisha was about to unleash. Her team at Nova Ventures had spent days perfecting this moment, and now, with Sarah Kim's warning about Richard's suspicions ringing in her ears, there was no turning back. Aisha glanced at Kevin Nguyen, who stood nearby, his laptop ready to stream their presentation live if Richard tried to silence them. Maria Lopez gave her a nod, her tablet loaded with data to back their claims. Sarah, pale but resolute, whispered, "He's on to me, Aisha. His team questioned me this morning." Aisha squeezed her friend's hand, her voice firm. "You're safe with us." She thought of her South Side roots, where neighbors rallied like family when times got tough. Block parties, church suppers, hands joined in prayer. That strength fueled her now. Richard had underestimated her team, but he was about to learn what they could do. The stage manager signaled, and Aisha stepped into the spotlight as Richard introduced her. "Aisha Thompson, CEO of Nova Ventures, our innovative partner." His smile was all teeth, clueless of the trap. Aisha's voice was steady, her slides projected on a massive screen. "Thank you, Richard. Let's talk about the future of tech and the cost of betrayal." The crowd murmured, sensing a shift. She clicked to a graph showing Apex's $90 million in lost contracts, her tone calm but cutting. Apex's numbers are crumbling. Why? Because their leadership prioritizes ego over ethics. Richard's smile faltered. Aisha pressed on, her slides shifting to damning evidence, emails where he called her too self-assured for her background, fake diversity reports used to win government contracts, and a memo proving he'd stolen her AI algorithm. The crowd gasped as she played a recording, Richard's voice, smug and unfiltered from a leaked meeting. "We don't need diversity drama. Aisha's ideas are solid, but she doesn't fit our image." Aisha paused, letting the words sink in. "That algorithm, which earned Apex billions, was mine, stolen from a woman you fired for daring to shine." The room erupted. Investors whispered, cameras flashed, and a TechCrunch reporter fired a question. "Mr. Hensley, is this true?" Richard stammered, his face red. "This is out of context." Aisha didn't flinch. "Is it? Let's show the context." She revealed Nova's AI platform, transparent, ethical, already powering contracts Apex had lost. While Apex fakes its values, Nova delivers. We've signed $90 million in deals, and we're just starting. The crowd roared, some standing to applaud. Richard lunged for the mic, but Kevin's live stream was already beaming the truth to millions online. Aisha thought of her mother, who'd stood tall despite a world that tried to shrink her, and Maya, working late shifts to heal others. This was for them.
"You thought you could erase us," she said, her eyes locked on Richard. "But we're the future." His face crumpled, the weight of his lies exposed to the world. As Aisha stepped off the stage, the crowd's cheers followed her, a tidal wave of validation. Richard stood frozen, his empire cracking in real time. Aisha clutched her locket, feeling her mother's pride. The summit wasn't the end, it was the beginning.
The applause from the Global Tech Summit still echoed in Aisha Thompson's ears as she stepped out of McCormick Place into Chicago's evening chill, the city's skyline glowing against the dusk. Her locket rested warm against her chest, her mother's "Dream Big" a quiet anthem for the victory she'd just claimed. On the summit stage, she dismantled Richard Hensley's empire with surgical precision. His lies, his theft, his prejudice laid bare for investors, media, and millions watching online. The memory of his face, pale and trembling as the crowd turned on him, felt less like triumph and more like justice. But Aisha knew this wasn't the end. It was the foundation of something greater. Her phone buzzed relentlessly as she walked toward the loop, notifications flooding in. TechCrunch had published a scathing exposé. Apex CEO caught in fraud and plagiarism scandal. Twitter was ablaze with clips of her presentation, the hashtag #NovaRising trending globally. Kevin Nguyen texted, "You killed it! Apex stocks tanking, down 40% already." Maria Lopez followed, "2 more clients just signed with us, 25 million. Aisha smiled, but her thoughts drifted to Sarah Kim, who'd risked everything as their insider. She'd slipped out of the summit early, shaken by Richard's team closing in. Aisha fired off a message. "You're safe now, we've got you." Sarah's reply was instant. "Thanks, sister, worth it." By morning, Apex Innovations was unraveling. Investors pulled $200 million in funding, and a federal investigation into Richard's falsified diversity reports hit the news. Major clients, auto giants, tech firms, canceled contracts, citing ethical misalignment. Within 9 months, Apex filed for bankruptcy, its glass headquarters a hollow shell. Richard faced lawsuits, his Connecticut estate auctioned to cover legal fees. The media painted him as a cautionary tale, a man who'd mistaken privilege for genius. Aisha watched it unfold from Nova's new office in River North, no longer a scrappy startup, but a sleek hub of innovation. Their AI platform, built on transparency, powered contracts worth $200 million, outpacing Apex's peak. Aisha's victory wasn't just financial. She'd been invited to speak at a TED Talk, her story of rising from a Southside apartment to tech titan resonating with millions. Standing in her office, she traced the locket's inscription, thinking of her mother's hands kneading dough for Sunday dinners, neighbors crowding their tiny kitchen like family. That Southside spirit of community, of lifting each other up, lived in Nova. Her team, once discarded by Apex, were now leaders. Kevin as CTO, Maria as head of analytics, and Sarah as operations chief. They'd built a company where talent trumped bias, where a kid from the wrong side of town could dream big and win. Her phone lit up with a message from her sister Maya. "Saw you on TV, sis. Mom's smiling somewhere." Aisha's eyes stung. Maya, still pulling double shifts at Northwestern Memorial, had always been her rock. She pictured their mother at a church picnic, her laughter mingling with the hum of community, teaching Aisha that strength wasn't just personal, it was collective. That night, Aisha found an email from Richard, now a ghost of his former self, applying for a junior role at Nova. She drafted a reply, her words cold and final. "Mr. Hensley, Nova Ventures values integrity, and October 31, 2025 at 6 p.m. plus 07. Your experience doesn't align with our mission. Good luck." She sent it and leaned back, gazing at Chicago's skyline. Richard had stolen her algorithm, but she'd taken his legacy. Nova wasn't just a company. It was proof that talent could rewrite the rules. Aisha touched her locket, feeling her mother's pride. The fight wasn't over, but she'd already won. 2 years after the Global Tech Summit, Aisha Thompson stood in her penthouse office atop a River North tower, Chicago's skyline stretching before her like a canvas of possibility. The city's lights twinkled, reflecting off Lake Michigan, a reminder of the South Side streets where she'd grown up dreaming bigger than her circumstances. Her locket, etched with her mother's dream big, rested against her heart, a quiet tether to the woman who'd taught her to fight. Nova Ventures, once a scrappy startup, was now a global force in AI, with $250 million in annual revenue and contracts spanning Tokyo to Toronto. Aisha had done more than take down Richard Hensley. She'd built a legacy that redefined what success could mean. Her desk held a fresh copy of Forbes, its cover proclaiming her Tech's New Titan, How Aisha Thompson Built a $250 Million Empire. The headline didn't capture the half of it. Nova's ethical AI platform powered industries from healthcare to urban planning, prioritizing communities like the one she'd known as a kid, places where talent thrived but opportunity didn't. She'd partnered with nonprofits to fund STEM programs for Chicago's youth, ensuring kids from the South Side had the tools to dream as big as she had. At a recent event, a teenage girl had hugged her saying, "You make me believe I can do this." Aisha had choked back tears, seeing her younger self in the girl's eyes. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the memory. A text from her sister Maya. "Forbes cover, sis? Mom's dancing up there." Aisha laughed, picturing their mother at a South Side block party, swaying to gospel with neighbors who'd been family in all but name. Maya, now head nurse at Northwestern Memorial, had flown in for the magazine's launch party, the two of them toasting with sparkling cider in their mother's honor. That night, they'd reminisced about her stories, how she'd cleaned downtown offices, smiling through exhaustion to give her daughters a shot at the American dream. Aisha had kept that dream alive, not just for herself, but for everyone Apex had discarded. Across town, Richard Hensley was a shadow of his former self. Apex Innovation's bankruptcy had left him penniless, his mansion sold, his reputation shredded. He lived in a one-bedroom in Cicero, typing resumes on a second-hand laptop. A LinkedIn post surfaced last week, Richard's face gaunt as he pitched himself as a consultant seeking new opportunities. Aisha had seen it when Kevin Nguyen, now Nova's CTO, forwarded it with a smirk. "He applied to us again," Kevin said, showing an email begging for a junior role. Aisha's response was unchanged. "Nova values integrity. Your experience doesn't align." She'd sent it without hesitation, her mother's voice in her mind. "You don't owe the world your kindness, only your strength." The real victory wasn't Richard's fall, it was what Aisha had built. Nova's team, once outcasts, were now industry leaders. Maria Lopez, head of analytics, advising global firms. Sarah Kim, operations chief, running their new London office. They'd proven talent didn't need a certain skin color or surname to shine. Aisha walked to her window, the city below a testament to resilience. She thought of her mother's church picnics, where neighbors shared plates and dreams, lifting each other up. That was Nova's heart, a community that turned pain into power. As she prepared for a board meeting, her assistant buzzed. "Ted wants you back." Aisha smiled. Her talk, redefining tech's future, had inspired millions, but her work wasn't done. She touched her locket, feeling her mother's pride, Maya's love, and Chicago's pulse. Richard had tried to erase her, but she'd written a new story, one where talent wins, where the American dream wasn't a privilege, but a right. The skyline glowed, and Aisha knew this was just the beginning.